I'll be okay.
What about you?
I'm used to it.
He's not good.
Mr. Adeyemi was no longer just observing. He began to test her. Not with money, but with the smallest things that people usually ignore. One cold morning, the wind slipped through the cracks of the old walls. Amara sat on the sidewalk, a small loaf of bread before her. The old man approached, slowly, torn clothes. A weak voice. "I'm so hungry." Amara looked at him. No questions. No suspicion. She broke the bread in half, gave him the larger piece. "Please, you eat. I'm used to it." Mr. Adeyemi took it. His hand trembled. Not from the cold, but because for the first time, he was given something without having to prove it. The next day, he tested her again. A woman pretended to fall right in front of Amara. People gathered. No one helped. Amara ran to her, lifted her up, used the only cloth she had to wipe the blood from the woman's forehead. "I don't have much, but I can't just leave you like this." From a distance, Mr. Adeyemi stood there, silent. His gaze was no longer that of a man judging, but of someone learning how to believe in people again. One rainy evening, Lagos rain came down suddenly, heavy and unforgiving. People rushed for shelter, pushing, shoving. Amara curled under a small overhang. Rain splashed against her face. She shivered. The old man walked in, soaked through. Amara looked at him, just for a second. Then she shifted aside, gave him the driest spot, and moved herself out into the rain. "Sit here, I'll be okay." Mr. Adeyemi said nothing. He sat down, but his eyes never left her. A girl with nothing in her hands, yet always ready to give. In the days that followed, he stopped testing her. He simply watched. He watched how she kept her heart warm in a cold world. And each time, something unfamiliar rose within him. Not surprise, but shame. Because he had once had everything, yet failed to keep what she had, a heart untouched by money. One night, he stood alone under a dim yellow streetlight. The wind passed through, carrying the damp scent of the city. He spoke softly. "I've searched for too long, not for the smartest, not for the strongest. Just someone who still gives when there's nothing left." For the first time, Mr. Adeyemi smiled, softly, but truly. And in that moment, he knew his search was over. Then, the rain poured over Lagos again. Water gathered into large puddles. People rushed past. And then, an old body collapsed. Mr. Adeyemi lay there, motionless, like a final test placed in the middle of the street. Sir, are you okay?" Amara's voice rang out. She ran to him without hesitation, her bare feet stepping into the freezing water. Her body was small, but it strained as if fighting against the storm itself. "Can you hear me?" No answer, only faint breathing. "Leave me," the old man's voice broke. "You still have to live." Amara froze for a second. Rain lashed against her face. Cold, but warm eyes. She shook her head firmly. No one deserves to be left behind. It carried more weight than any promise in the world. She dragged him to the corner of an old wall, where a small overhang offered barely any shelter. Amara took off her thin jacket. She hesitated, just one breath, then gently placed it over him. "Please, keep it. I'm used to the cold." Those words weren't because she wasn't cold, but because she chose to let someone else be less cold. The city fell silent. Amara curled up beside him, her lips turning pale. But her eyes never left the old man. No one witnessed it. No reward. No reason, except one simple truth. She could not abandon another human being. In the darkness, the old man's eyes slowly opened. He watched her for a long time. Not testing, but as someone who had found what he lost. That night's rain washed away the doubt in the billionaire's soul. He whispered, "Enough. You've passed everything." Morning came slowly, as if the city itself was still drowsy. After the long night of rain, puddles lingered across the streets. The air felt colder than usual. And beneath the old overhang, Amara was still there, dark, circles under her eyes, her body drained after a sleepless night. Beside her, the old man was awake, quiet, but no longer as weak as before. The sound of an engine echoed, smooth, luxurious. A sleek black car pulled up right in front of them, unlike anything that had ever appeared in this place. The door opened. Two men in suits stepped out. Their polished shoes gleamed a sharp contrast to the wet, dirty street. They looked around. Then their eyes stopped on the old man. "Sir, we've been looking for you all night." Their voices were low, but filled with respect. Amara froze. Her heart pounded. She turned and looked at the old man, the same man who had trembled in her arms the night before. Now he slowly stood up, without anyone's help, his back straight. His gaze sharpened. Every movement carried a presence she had never seen before. As if his true self had just awakened. He looked at her. No longer with the tired eyes of a homeless man, but with the eyes of someone who had seen far too much in life. "Thank you, Amara." His voice was deep, slow, but clear. Each word seemed to reach straight into her heart. Amara said nothing. She just stood there, unable to understand what was happening. One of the men stepped forward, opened the car door, bowed deeply. "Mr. Ademi, the board is waiting for you." The air seemed to freeze. Amara felt a ringing in her ears. "Mr. Ademi?" she repeated, as if that name could not possibly belong to the man before her. He gave a small nod, a simple gesture, yet enough to shatter the entire world she thought she knew. "That's right," he said gently. "The billionaire you may have seen on TV." Amara stepped back, then another step. As if physical distance could help her make sense of this truth. "No, that's not possible." She shook her head. Her voice trembling. You were here, sleeping on the street, eating bread." Her sentence broke apart. Incomplete. Just like her thoughts in that moment. Mr. Ademi looked at her. His eyes were no longer cold, nor distant. Only honest. Double quotes. "I needed to know," he said slowly, "whether a person's kindness still exists when no one is watching." He paused. Just a second, but enough for everything to settle. "And you," his voice softened, "gave me the answer." There was no music. No spotlight. Only a girl standing in the middle of a damp street. And a man who had just stepped out of his own disguise. The car was still waiting. The two men were still bowing. The world of wealth was waiting for him to return. But in that moment, Mr. Ademi didn't look at them. He only looked at Amara. As if the most important decision of his life was not in the boardroom. But in the girl standing there, trembling before him. And Amara still couldn't believe that the man she had saved last night was the very one who could change her entire destiny. The distance between them was only a few steps. But now, it felt like two worlds were touching. Mr. Ademi stepped forward, slowly, not because of age, but because every word he was about to say weighed more than any fortune he had ever owned. "I have met hundreds of people." His voice was deep, not loud, but enough to quiet the entire space. "The rich, the successful, those who speak beautifully about kindness, about morality." He gave a faint smile, a sad one. "But when it comes time to give, they always keep the safe part for themselves." He opened his hand. In his palm was a small piece of hardened bread, simple, old, but carefully kept, like something more valuable than gold. "But you," his voice slowed, as if every word had to pass through his heart before leaving his lips. You gave to me when you had nothing left to keep. The air fell silent. Amara looked at the bread and recognized it. It was her only meal that day, the thing she hadn't hesitated to share. Mr. Ademi tightened his grip slightly. His hand trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something that had been touched. A tear fell, slow, heavy, dropping onto the damp ground. No one spoke. No one could believe that a man who stood at the top like him was crying over a piece of bread. I have had everything, he said softly. Money, power, status. He looked straight at Amara. His eyes were no longer those of a billionaire, but of a man searching for something real. But I have never had. He paused. Someone truly genuine. He took out an envelope, thick, sealed, no sign of display. Just simple, like his decision. I don't need the smartest. I don't need the most capable. I need... His voice slowed. A heart that doesn't change when money arrives. He held the envelope out to her. I want you to become my heir. The world seemed to stop. Amara stood frozen. Her hands trembled, not from the cold anymore, but from what she had just heard. Too overwhelming to believe. But I have nothing. Her voice was soft, fragile, as if speaking any louder would make everything disappear. Mr. Ademi smiled. Not the smile of a man who had won, but of someone who had finally found what he had been searching for. Exactly because you have nothing, he said gently. You have nothing to lose of yourself. He looked at her for a long moment. And that is the rarest thing in the world. The morning wind passed through, carrying the last trace of the night's cold rain. But in that moment, something warmed. Not money, not power, but a choice, a destiny, and a heart that had finally been seen. A few months later, Lagos was still loud. The streets were still crowded. Glass buildings still reflected the blazing sun. This city had never stopped for anyone. But somewhere, a life had completely changed. The glass doors slid open. A young woman stepped out of the tallest building in the way. Business district, elegant attire, confident steps, calm eyes. No longer the Amara who once curled beneath a cold overhang. No longer the girl who counted every last coin. But there was one thing that hadn't changed. A luxury car waited. The driver bowed. Ma'am, where would you like to go? Amara glanced at the car. Then shook her head. No need, she said softly, her voice still gentle. Just like before. I'd like to walk for a bit. She turned back toward the old street. Where everything began. The worn walls, the leaking overhangs, the people still struggling to get through each day. No one recognized her at first. Until she set down the bags. Food. Warm blankets. Medicine. And the kind of care this place hadn't felt in a long time. A child ran up. Eyes lighting up. Miss, who are you? Amara knelt down. Smiled. Didn't answer right away. She simply handed the child a piece of bread, just like she once had, when she herself had nothing. An older man nearby asked, why are you doing all this? You don't have to come back here. The question lingered, not with suspicion. Just with confusion. Amara stood up. Her gaze drifted toward the old overhang, where one rainy night had changed everything. She stayed silent for a moment. As if touching that memory again. Then she spoke soft, but clear, because one day I was saved too. Not by money. Not by a miracle. But by a chance. By someone who saw her worth. When the world had looked away. The wind moved through the street. Old tarps fluttered gently. The sunlight fell warmer than usual. Amara stood there, not Above anyone. Not greater than anyone, but she had become the person she once needed most. In the distance, a black car came to a stop. Mr. Adeyemi sat inside, watching quietly. He didn't step out, didn't call her name. He simply smiled softly. His eyes no longer searching. Because he knew his greatest legacy was not in buildings. But in a heart that knows how to give. The camera slowed, resting on Amara's face, a gentle smile. Not loud. Not showy, but enough to close the story. And begin a new journey.